Nazarov from Chainlink, and Sergey is going to be talking about growing DeFi with a lot more data and collateral types. And there's a lot of things that will be covered in this one. So what I'll do is I'll welcome Sergey here and let him take it from here. So Sergey, welcome, and I'll let you kick off with your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Kartik, for having me at the event. Yep. Hi, everybody. So we're going to be talking today about how DeFi is able to grow because it has access to more data and various collateral types and some of the kind of economics and market dynamics that are driving its growth. I think one of the first useful things for us to consider is exactly how the architecture or the underlying systems powering DeFi are evolving. And I think what we're actually seeing is a shift towards a more service-oriented kind of microservices type architecture for DeFi dApps, which many people call composability, and the ability to join a lot of these applications together with either other DeFi protocols as services or data sources provided through oracles like Chainlink as services, right? And I think maybe the first basis on which we should think about this is what happened in the web world or even in the enterprise software world when you moved from more monolithic, singular kind of closed systems to services, libraries, and all these kind of systems that could be composed together into various increasingly useful configurations, right? And I think the shift was kind of dramatic. I think this shift from we have these closed, monolithic, singular kind of applications that can't interact with other systems at all or easily, to a service-oriented architecture where people built reusable services and they utilized those reusable services in various configurations. In the web world, that really led to a massive acceleration at the speed and quality with which people are able to build things. Basically, you started to see, things like Uber, various iPhone apps, all kinds of various use cases being built because people were able to compose reusable services in a secure way. They were able to improve those services if they really liked them and put them back out to people. And it actually created this rapid iteration where you had something like Uber basically combining a GPS API, combining a SMS API to message users and a payments API to pay users, right? And that rapid iteration and the ability to combine reusable services in a service-oriented architecture is what I think led to a lot of the iteration and acceleration in the web world, and why a lot of the use cases we have today are so well polished, and why many of them might even exist because of the resource-constrained environment those were built in, right? By not so large teams that then got something right and were able to expand it. I think we're seeing a kind of similar evolution in DeFi where you had more monolithic smart contracts that were more singular in their focus and they were more closed, and kind of the code was much greater in its size and its complexity, and that created essentially two security issues. So I think the security dynamics around something like the DAO and writing big contracts that kind of can have failure points because they're so big, because they're so monolithic and singular, and they have packed so much into them, was partly for a security reason initially traded away, right? For smaller contracts that can be composed in more secure ways. And now what you have is you have protocols that are written in these more secure ways where you have many separate contracts interacting properly. But people have been able to take the pieces of their DeFi protocols, like the Synthetics protocol, the Aave protocol, the Yearn protocol, and they've been able to combine those pieces into more useful things than any of them would have built individually, right? So you have an ecosystem now of composable, essentially on-chain services in the form of contracts that can be composed in a very secure way because the scope and the code and the control of any one contract is relatively small, but they all do something useful. And this is where our space is really starting to mimic the speed of evolution that you would see in the web world. Actually, the thing that I've seen over the years of building smart contracts is that you could think about the evolution of smart contracts also in this sense of how do I compose different pieces together to quickly build something really secure and useful, right? If initially you started at Bitcoin, you had one singular system that basically enabled Bitcoin and multi-sig, and that was what the world was like, and that's what you could do, right? Then you move to protocol smart contracts in about 2014, where you had these protocols, these blockchains, which you had to do a lot of work to put any new piece into, and the pieces didn't always interact at all, right? And that was really the problem that Ethereum solved for a lot of us. It basically solved this problem where I have this monolithic system, it has these pieces that can't interact, and now I have a way to write these individual small pieces of code like the ERC20 standard and some DAO voting schemes and certain multi-sig private key signing schemes and others. And all of those then became their own separate kind of services and more security audited contracts that then began to get composed into the realm of token sales and DAO voting and certain private key signing things, right? And that was a huge leap forward for the space because people could build those individual pieces and compose them together in the configuration of I have a token, I have a voting dynamic, and I have a multi-sig dynamic, and I have these kind of 2 or 3 dynamics getting composed properly. I think that the next evolution of smart contracts is actually a combination of the composability and the ability to write singular contracts with very specific goals on systems like Ethereum, and then for there to be other services and other capabilities represented on chain for use by those smart contracts, effectively expanding the universe of what they could do. And what I'm actually seeing is a rapid kind of composition of the off-chain resources we're able to make accessible to contracts, as well as what those contracts end up doing with that price data or that weather data. That creates its own kind of contract and service that other protocols can use as collateral, as a resource to manage risk, as basically as another service, right? So now you have services being strung together to create better services that then other people can build on top of. And not only build UIs and various interfaces to utilize the value that the service provides, but actually more services that then interact with the ones that have already been composed, basically. And this is really the very exciting and hopeful dynamic that we're starting to see evolve in DeFi. And it's kind of the dynamic that I think is driving a lot of this growth. Because you have a few really world-class teams like Synthetics, Aave, Yearn, Nexus Mutual, and a number of others that are building these kind of building blocks, but doing it in a way that it's not a closed monolithic singular system just for their use. It's meant to include value and interaction from other systems. And they've amazingly enough been able to do that in a way that, for example, Synthetics, Aave, Yearn all interact in a meaningful way. Right? And I think that's one of the large driving factors of DeFi is that you have people finally building good focused products that are then reusable by other teams. So that's one of the key dynamics that I'm seeing. Now, in this dynamic, there is also a useful set of components that are not inherently on chain. They are not a token contract to generate a token ledger and manage it. They are not a DAO voting scheme. They are not a multi-sig process. There are a lot of resources out there that are about things like data, that are about things like computations that blockchains can't or don't want to do for privacy or scalability reasons, that are about access to payment systems that use cases want access to various data that basically use cases need, whether that's election results, price data, weather data for insurance, whatever it might be. And this is really the category of kind of services and capabilities that we put on chain in singular individual units that then get composed together with these other DeFi protocols, which then create a lot of useful value around the data that we provide, and ergo make another service that's even more useful for others to consume and interact with, right? So that's kind of the exciting stage I feel that the ecosystem is at, and that both the DeFi protocols that make certain kind of contracts that act as services for other contracts, and we as the provider of certain off-chain resources are enabling and driving forward. Now, the other exciting dynamic that I'm seeing is the fact that we are now driving forward the existence of multiple types of contracts. If we started out by providing market data from tens of different data providers, whether they're running their own Chainlink node or selling data just directly into the Chainlink network. You basically had aggregations of data that were sold to a multitude of DeFi contracts, which enabled them to quickly and securely launch more markets. And we, on a weekly basis now, are able to enable the launching of new markets, new useful DeFi smart contracts. But this year, we've basically seen an expansion into other categories of contracts. And what we notice is that as we put new categories of data, new categories of off-chain resources, essentially new services that can be consumed on-chain through a contract in the form of an Oracle contract, in the form of a Chainlink kind of representation of an off-chain resource, we see additional use cases kind of coming into existence and getting better, right? So one of these categories is gaming. In that category, you have randomness, you have sports scores, and you have various other things people basically want to bet on and game around, as well as the generation of NFTs, which interestingly enough then get popped back into DeFi as collateral. And so you're seeing what we've basically seen is a pattern where as DeFi protocols provide more services, and as we provide more services or more individual contracts that can act as services for other contracts, you see a kind of an explosion of use cases, and you see a rapid improvement of the existing offerings to the point where they become more attractive and useful for users, right? And in off-chain, in gaming, you see the provision of randomness, off-chain gaming data for sports events and things like that. We've also seen a lot of improvement in the insurance industry. Like, I'm very, very proud to say that we have crop insurance live using weather data fed in by Chainlinks into a system like Arbol, which is able to determine the weather and automatically pay out contractual outcomes to farmers in both developed economies and emerging markets where they wouldn't traditionally have insurance. And a lot of that is possible because we're able to provide essentially an on-chain service in the form of a Chainlink that provides data, or in the form of a Chainlink network that aggregates data to a sufficiently high level of security to trigger a certain amount of value. Another category that recently arrived using the Chainlink network is proofs of reserve. So proof of reserves basically shows you that an underlying asset is there and that its value has been retained, and proves that to DeFi protocols. And what that does is it allows the use of that asset, whether that's Bitcoin or real estate or gold or a bank account or whatever that asset is, in the use of DeFi protocols. So not only does data generate more DeFi markets, it generates new collateral by enabling things like NFTs and insurance, which can then become their own units of value that act as collateral within DeFi, right? So you enable the ability for DeFi to function. You enable the ability for more collateral to function within DeFi, while you're also enabling useful new use cases like gaming and insurance. And then there's a whole large world of collateral that isn't proven or understood by DeFi protocols because they can't know its stability or solvency. And once you prove that, then that world of collateral can make its way into DeFi products, both diversifying away their risk and essentially growing the value secured by DeFi. We also see a number of other categories of data. For example, recently we've been going in the direction of even putting election data on chain. So we're now able to put election data for all 50 states and the presidential election on chain in a very reliable manner from the data source being the Associated Press. And that, I think, will also enable new use cases, because once a service is available, people begin to utilize it and they begin to compose it in all kinds of interesting ways. And then the real question is, how do they compose it into their protocol such that that protocol creates a new, highly valuable service that other protocols then use, the way that Aave and Synthetics and Yearn interoperate right now to create large amounts of value, right? And so this is really, I think, the world that we're going to see more and more of. This type of graph is really going to grow, in my opinion, pretty rapidly, because teams have now made it an express goal to build individual contracts that other contracts can utilize as a service. And we have made it our express goal to enable the protocols, the DeFi protocols that are taking this approach with the best possible data, the best possible randomness, the best possible proof of collateral, so that their service that they generate is actually highly reliable, highly useful to both their immediate consumers of that service, whether that's a derivatives service through Synthetics or a lending service through Aave, and also interestingly, useful to other contracts on the back end, which then take the functionality and repackage it into their contract and their interface in new and exciting ways. Which at the end of the day is really the design pattern that you see in the acceleration of the web world. And that's really I think the big exciting point, that when people look at composability, or they look at what's happening in DeFi, or why is it moving so quickly, or why is it getting built so quickly, or is it real or not real? I think it's extremely real. And I think it's accelerating because there are smart people building individual pieces that fit together very well. And they're building it in a way that maintains the security of each individual piece, allowing them to be used and secure large amounts of value without anyone having to reinvent them. And that's a very powerful dynamic that historically has led to a lot of new use cases and a rapid iteration and improvement of existing use cases. Now, in our case, once again, what we do is we essentially provide a category of these on-chain contracts, which essentially act as services that enable people to access, in our case, off-chain systems. And off-chain systems are important because in the case of DeFi, for example, you need price data. And a lot of DeFi is driven by price data because it defines what's happening with the underlying assets that DeFi is essentially securing. And so you need an accurate picture of reality. You need a definitive truth about price data in order to know what's happening with assets, right? We generate this, as a more detailed example in two ways. One way is that data providers themselves run their own Chainlink node, and they're able to, at the origin, sign their own data and send that signed data into systems like Ethereum, which then allows it to be aggregated in our aggregation contracts so that you have a measure of decentralization across nodes and data providers. And you have a well-aggregated, highly reliable source of truth that's either signed by the origin because the data provider is willing and able to run a new piece of their infrastructure because they see enough value in contracts. Or in some cases, you have data providers that aren't yet ready to sign up for new infrastructure or build an entirely or run an entirely new piece of their stack in relation to blockchains. And the beauty of the Chainlink network, I think, is that it's highly flexible. So it can both enable people to sign their data and put it into aggregation contracts and send it on to the relevant contracts. And if a data provider, as many data providers, if a data provider doesn't want to run a new piece of infrastructure, they can simply sell their data with zero changes to their infrastructure immensely efficiently and quickly. Many times the Chainlink network can even just pull data from their APIs without them having to do anything. And this enables a large universe of data, in this case, price data that's accurate and reflective of reality to make DeFi products that are as good, in many cases, better than CeFi products, right? Which is where some of the value will flow to DeFi from. Like we said earlier, we're seeing this same Oracle network model get composed into various categories of inputs, various categories of services, basically. So in this case, we are composing together an Oracle network that gets rainfall data, temperature data, various weather data, and forwards that onto other services like the rainfall evaluator contract, the temperature evaluator, and basically insurance contracts that evaluate outcomes and can actually be really used by other insurance protocols if they really wanted to, right? And the fascinating thing is that even if the initial implementation of Chainlink was very and is very good at providing aggregated, highly proven, highly secure price data, Chainlink is really a flexible kind of network of nodes and a framework to compose oracles around any topic, around any piece of data that really comes in the form of structured data, so an API. And in this case, what you're seeing is the ability to compose an Oracle network around rainfall and weather, which I'm very proud to say enables crop insurance in places in the world where they would have probably still had to wait another decade to get crop insurance. And therefore, they can manage their risk properly and benefit from smart contracts in a very specific way. The second fascinating thing is then the value that systems like Arbol secure, which as I understand is now past 250 million in risk value and set to surpass over $1 billion next year, that value can eventually be turned into units of collateral that make their way into DeFi. So not only is there an enablement of DeFi by providing data, but there, as you enable more value to be stored in various contracts on chain, people find creative ways to turn that value into collateral for DeFi, and therefore both diversify DeFi's risk, which is extremely important and going to be even more important the way the global economy is going, and also basically DeFi provides a market for those contracts to sell their value into, or to sell the insurance cash flows or whatever they create, right? So this is another fascinating dynamic where you have protocols that weren't about making financial products. They were about making insurance or NFTs. But now the value they generate, or the value they put on chain in the form of a contract, even if it's not a token, right? If there's no token associated with that, there's just a contract with insurance related value or NFT related value. You can now use that within the DeFi ecosystem to diversify away risk in very useful ways. And I think diversified kind of collections of assets, the way the global economy is going to be quite an attractive proposition. This is kind of just another example of this, where you basically see something called Chainlink VRF, which is our provable on-chain randomness solution, providing randomness to a number of different gaming contracts. And that gives those gaming contracts assurances that they're operating properly, gives their user assurance that they're actually fraud proof, in that they use a source of randomness that's verifiable. And once again, that accelerates gaming. When you accelerate gaming, you accelerate the value people place into gaming. And when you accelerate the value people place into gaming, you have more value on chain to eventually be turned into collateral for DeFi. So that's another dynamic. The most recent dynamic we've seen, and that we're really excited about as well, is the ability to create proofs of reserve. So when you create a proof of reserve, you basically prove that an asset is actually somewhere, and that an asset is actually of a certain value, or is solvent, or is secure, or is in the state that the entity or the contract relying on it believes it to be in, right? So in fact, if you had a system like proof of reserve, the 2008 financial crisis probably wouldn't have happened, or even if it did, it would have been softened by probably an order of magnitude, right? Because you would have just been able to prove the status or the real world kind of underlying value of mortgages, right? So proof of reserve, even though it's starting out by proving the value of, or the amount of Bitcoin locked up in a wrapped Bitcoin contract on Ethereum, providing automated assurance to DeFi protocols that the wrapped Bitcoin that they're relying on is actually backed by real Bitcoin on the Bitcoin chain. Proof of reserve is really extensible to a multitude of other forms of collateral. Basically, any piece of collateral that you can get definitive proof about from a data source, whether the data source is a blockchain or whether it's off-chain. And this, once again, shows how Oracle networks, when composed, they can forward in data, but they can also act to generate definitive truth, or to generate certain proof or data about the world in ways that are very useful for smart contracts, right? And once again, I think what this all leads to is better and better composable contracts that are small, security audited, and interoperable with other contracts on purpose. Those contracts essentially act as libraries, building blocks, services, whatever you want to call them, that then get composed successfully with other teams' contracts. And soon enough, you have an ecosystem where people can build truly amazing things without, even having to write many of the contracts, or worry about the data source inputs, or the proof of an underlying asset's reliability, or the randomness that's triggering a contract. Because that is I think what's been holding up our space for some time, is that people were forced to have to build a randomness generator and a way to get data on chain very securely, which is extremely complicated in its own set of computer science problems. And then they were building a system where they didn't have proof of the underlying assets and whether those assets actually were solvent or in existence. And so, there wasn't the level of proof that they wanted, even though the contract was providing proof about state changes. And so now, once you have a world where you have really smart focused teams building the building blocks, and teams like Chainlink providing them with various services that they need to be fit into those building blocks in order for them to work properly, I think you see a rapid acceleration. And I think that this is really the dynamic that is going to drive us into mainstream adoption and rapidly improve use cases to the degree that everyone wants to use them. I think the challenge for DeFi is really, at this point, twofold. It's converting the rest of crypto as a format for value into DeFi contracts, which I think is going to happen. And then the second dynamic is, how do you cross the chasm to the early majority, right? How do you cross the chasm to the users that want to utilize DeFi protocols, but they never heard of it, or they might not even know they're utilizing DeFi protocols, right? So just the average user. And I think what's going to happen is that once there's enough building blocks that are secure enough and able to be connected enough, connected together in a usable enough way, there will be all kinds of applications like banks, fintechs, Robinhood, any number of other applications that end up providing access to DeFi protocols. Because these people don't want to build any of this, just like they don't want to build Bitcoin, right? Their users say, I want Bitcoin. They give the users Bitcoin. Their users say, I want yield from DeFi because it's 4%, and the yield that I have in a bank account is 0.1%. All the interfaces on the web will just say, sure, I'll give you whatever you want. Here we go. Here's the DeFi protocol you wanted. You get 4% now. All you got to do is hit a button, convert dollars to stable coins. Congratulations, you're getting 4%. By the way, it was actually 8%, but we keep 4% because we're whoever. And so it's a great deal for everybody as long as DeFi smart contracts continue to function properly and grow in value and collateral and returns and all these things, for which there's a kind of virtuous cycle, right? The movement to the early majority, I think, is going to be underpinned by the building blocks and the DeFi protocols and the services that people are now starting to compose and polish into highly secure, highly reliable collections of services that essentially define DeFi and define the value of what DeFi will provide, not only to the crypto community, but to the mainstream, which if the crypto community is worth 360 billion, right, and DeFi only holds 2.5 to 3%, I mean, it's a no-brainer that you would have your cryptocurrency in a DeFi protocol gaining some kind of interest rate, right? And the rails to do that are just getting accelerated in a really, really rapid pace. But in terms of the mainstream, the amount of value that's out there to make its way both into the cryptocurrency format and into DeFi is orders of magnitude larger than what we're dealing with today. And in the environment that we're going towards, where you have low interest rates and low transparency for assets, and the low transparency becomes a concern because counterparty risk is what people care about when there are solvency issues. And solvency issues occur when there are global market boomers and busts, namely busts. I think you're basically actually going to see DeFi and smart contract insurance, and to a degree blockchain, fraud-proof blockchain gaming, driving a lot of the value that goes onto blockchains the way that tokens previously drove a lot of the value going on. Because now imagine if you can offer people a 4% interest rate through a crypto bank account, and all they have to do is click a button that says yes. Like, that's coming. And people don't care if they get their 4% from a crypto-based DeFi protocol powered thing or from a bank. They could care less. They don't know. And so once all of that gets composed in the right way, those rails are going to move this value into the crypto format. But importantly, I think it'll move the value into the crypto format, not for people to gain tokens, but for people to experience and benefit from DeFi. And so that's, I think, the really powerful thing, is that tokens are one thing, and that's great. And people can have all kinds of ideas about tokens and what they're worth or not worth, and that's kind of their choice. But if you're able to offer the global financial market 4% or 2% interest and yield in environments where they can hardly get 0.1 or 0.2%, and you're able to make that secure and transparent and regulated and reliable, I mean, that's what the global financial system is based on, right? That's what drives a lot of activity. And so the next question then is, how do we continue to enable this? This is kind of the body of work we're engaged in, where as more smart contracts appear, people have more and more reasons to consume them. And that means there's a larger market for data providers to sell their data. And that's what we enable. Likewise, as more people use contracts, they pay more fees. Those fees partly go to pay for security of systems like Chainlink and data providers and so on. And eventually you arrive at a place where you have a very large user group that's paying into dApps that are paying for data and security and basically services in the form of on-chain contracts. And both of these cycles are what we're really accelerating. We're accelerating the creation of new smart contracts by providing the services and the data and all the capabilities that people need on chain. That's generating more usage, which is generating more demand for the data and the services and demand for the security of that data and those services, which once again, as we put more of it on chain, we notice that people build even more contracts. So it's a very virtuous cycle. And this is kind of the body of work that we're engaged in. If you find this body of work interesting, we're thrilled to work with you. We have two formats in which we very efficiently and effectively work with people now in a kind of remote open source basis. One of them is the Chainlink Grants Program, of which there are multiple categories about both integrating more data, building developer tools to build contracts better, providing security, and providing blockchain integrations. And that's the grant program. If you have a dev shop or a team that would like to work on these problems, in an open source kind of remote work way, we have a growing and increasingly more popular grants program that enables these cycles and these services to go on chain. And then finally, if you find this problem to be compelling and something that you find interesting and exciting, and you see the value in accelerating the next evolution in smart contracts into this useful state of contracts that are about providing value to the average person because of what the contract actually does and what we enable it to do, then we're thrilled to speak with you and to find a good way to collaborate. We're a remote team, open source, and really in our team and our team dynamic, kind of the best ideas tend to win. And so we encourage you to talk to us if you find this problem interesting and important.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sergey. That was a great talk. I think this is a really good way to really kind of paint the picture on how big the opportunity is, that we can use crypto to leverage and kind of offer a lot more to the rest of the world. So it was really good to kind of see that perspective on kind of how you get to enable that as developers, especially the ones watching this, and now you can also use Chainlink to sort of get this. There are a handful of questions that we've had from our chat, but unfortunately we are out of time and we're running a bit over. So what I'll do is I'll ask a quick one and then I'll kind of relay the remaining ones to you and the rest of the team. So the quick question that I have is just in general, a lot of people are curious about what is currently the cost of updating and sort of adding information to Chainlink, and sort of if it's too high, how are you making it easy for people to sort of not bear that cost as we add more and more data sources?
Yeah, sure. So there's kind of two dynamics here. The first dynamic is what level of security is somebody comfortable with? And what we do right now is we perform on-chain aggregation because that's the most secure method for doing this. And that's why we're able to secure over 4 billion on production without any issues. And that's why we have over, billions more publicly announced and kind of more upcoming at some point, right? It's because we prioritize security because we work with people like Ari Jules, who used to be the chief scientist of RSA. Today, we recently announced that our new VP of engineering is Ben Chan, who was previously the CTO of BitGo and built, the multi-sig solution that allows the movement of about 15% of all Bitcoin, right? So the first priority is security. And that's why on-chain aggregation is the first step. On-chain aggregation can be costly, but realistically, if you're securing billions of dollars in value, you should seek to pay for security if you're able to get it. And the key point is whether you're able to get it. And with Chainlink, you're able to get it. And believe me, from the Oracle failures that have been out there and that we've seen, you absolutely want it, right? The second answer to that is the scalability of either the on-chain environment or the off-chain environment. So since 2019, we've had something called threshold signatures and off-chain reporting, which we're currently working through now, is in certain phases of security review, and is basically the scalable version of Chainlink that is the expanded scalable version that does the aggregation in a off-chain manner. But the important nuance is that you actually want to maintain an on-chain aggregation as a possible fallback at a lower rate of frequency. And you also want an off-chain aggregation that is highly scalable. And so the highly scalable off-chain aggregation is something we're working on now. And that will enable probably an order of magnitude increase in the amount of networks we can launch, in the cost of doing that, and any number of other things. And that's basically born out of the need that even though we have many, many networks and we're constantly launching them for users to launch new products, we have a large amount of demand for a lot of different price pairs, right? So I think the important dynamic here is firstly that you actually want to prioritize security more than anything else with a system like this. And there's a reason that off-chain aggregation provides that security. On-chain aggregation provides that security. Off-chain aggregation also provides that security, but it's not something you slap together in the weekend and you kind of cross your fingers. The people that are doing that by forking some chain and trying to make it into an oracle, or like trying to cook up something themselves with them and their one web developer, we've spent, I think, over $1 million at this point on security audits. I think we work with the academic research community on a regular basis. These are not simple problems, right? So we've been kind of baking OCR and threshold signatures for some time, and it's kind of getting to the stage where it's in those stages of security audit and review, and it's getting properly assessed and figured out, right? As whether that's secure, and I think we're kind of at that stage. That will drop the costs really significantly. And also, just so you understand, the costs are not completely passed on to our users. Our users all pay a certain portion of a fee that is then pooled for one Oracle network. So any one user isn't paying all of these costs. It's shared across those users. And also it's partly paid for by a kind of link reward that pays the node operators to properly operate the network as the user fees grow. And they are pretty much rapidly growing at this point. So I do imagine we'll be at a point where, with the scalability of OCR, the scalability improvements of various chains, and the growth in users, we'll eventually be at a point where user fees completely pay for specific Oracle networks that are sustaining and feeding the security of those users' DeFi protocols. But the point is that we're pooling the security and the fees around a single network and a single piece of data that's getting put on chain. And that kind of security is once again the goal, right? Because your goal is not just to build some system that can do something scalably, but in an insecure way. Your goal is to build the most secure system you can and gradually scale it in a secure way while maintaining clear economics that work, which they clearly do because the network operates properly, both in environments where gas fees are high and low. So the Chainlink network operates even in environments where the gas fees are high because the economics of the Chainlink network work properly, which is once again to be viewed not from a purely economic point of view, but from a point of view of security.
Great. No, that was a very insightful answer, and hope that the couple people that asked questions along these lines have a bit more clarity now. So with that, I want to thank you, Sergey, for giving us your time today and kind of going in depth on how big the opportunity in crypto is, and how we can make a lot of data sources integrate with the rest of the DeFi